Hey everyone, and welcome back. We've got a lot to get to today, so let's jump right in.
Sounds good to me.
Well, first off, it seems like former President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky are really going at it.
Yeah, it's getting pretty intense.
Trump's now calling Zelensky a dictator.
Right. And this all comes after Zelensky kind of hinted that, Trump was basically buying into Russian disinformation.
Interesting. So this was after those U.S.-Russia talks,
Yeah.
right? The ones in Saudi Arabia, where they were trying to figure out, how to end the war.
Exactly. And of course, Ukraine wasn't invited to those talks.
Right, right. And this isn't the first time Trump said stuff like this. He's been saying that, well, Ukraine's to blame for the whole thing, that they could have just made a deal with Russia and avoided it all.
Yeah, and European leaders are pushing back pretty hard against all this. They're saying, look, Zelensky was democratically elected, and there's no way they could hold elections in the middle of a war.
Makes sense. They've also been really clear that they're standing with Zelensky.
For sure. And on top of that, you've got the EU continuing to ramp up sanctions on Russia. This time it's aluminum and any ship suspected of carrying oil illegally.
Okay, so things are definitely heating up on that front.
No doubt.
All right, well, let's switch gears for a second and talk about Yemen. It's just a terrible situation over there with the civil war. It's getting really dangerous for aid workers.
Yeah, it's awful. The Houthi rebels have been detaining UN workers and people from NGOs, and it's making it really hard to get aid to the people who need it.
It's just a terrible cycle. I mean, you've got this conflict that's already causing so much suffering, and then you have these aid workers who are risking their lives to help people, and then they end up getting detained. It just makes the whole situation even worse.
Totally.
Yeah.
And tragically, a World Food Program staff member actually died in custody. It really highlights how dangerous things are right now.
Absolutely. And then you've got President Trump's freeze on USAA jail.
Right. That's not helping things either. It's a major source of funding for humanitarian aid in Yemen, and, well, now it's gone.
It's a tough situation all around.
Uh-uh.
Okay, well, let's move on to something a little different. Have you heard about what's going on in Georgia?
Are you talking about Bidzina Ivanishvili?
Yeah, him. Georgia's richest guy and former prime minister.
I have, yeah. There's some talk that he's been moving assets around to avoid sanctions from the U.S. and the U.K.
Right, and it seems like these sanctions are because of his political influence and his ties to Russia.
Uh-huh. And this whole thing is really raising some questions about, transparency and corruption in Georgia, especially because there are those huge protests there against Russian influence.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Meanwhile, over in South Korea, the impeached president, Yoon Suk-yeol, he's really trying to get back in power. And some of the stuff he's saying, it sounds kind of familiar.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, he's talking a lot about, Cold War fears and anti-communist stuff.
Oh, wow.
He's even saying that North Korea is infiltrating South Korea and that China interfered in their elections.
I see what you mean about it sounding familiar.
Yeah. And the thing is, he's not really offering any proof.
Oh, wow. So that's got to be causing a lot of distrust and fear, especially with his supporters.
It is. And it just shows how, even in a place like South Korea, those old fears can come back so easily. Okay, well, let's move on to something a bit heavier. There's been a really sad development in the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Oh, no. What happened?
Well, the bodies of 4 hostages who are being held in Gaza, they're being brought back to Israel.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, it is. One of them was a mother and her 2 young children, the Bibas family,
Yeah.
and a longtime peace activist.
That's so heartbreaking.
Yeah. Prime Minister Netanyahu, he called Hamas monsters. And this all comes right after a ceasefire agreement, which was supposed to include hostage exchanges.
It's a fragile situation for sure. Do we know what's happening with the other hostages?
Well, there are 6 who are supposed to be freed on Saturday.
Hopefully that goes smoothly. It sounds like the situation is still really tense, though.
Oh, it is. Okay, well, let's switch gears again, literally this time. Did you hear about the SpaceX rocket?
The one that landed in Poland?
Yeah, that one. Debris from a Falcon 9. Apparently, it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, but not in a controlled way.
Oh, wow. That's not good.
Nope. And some of the pieces landed in Poland, and they think maybe some landed in Ukraine, too.
That's crazy. And it really highlights the whole issue of space debris. As we keep launching more stuff into space, it just gets more and more crowded up there.
Right, exactly. And this is actually the 4th incident recently with a SpaceX Falcon 9.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that many.
Yeah. So it definitely raises some questions about reusable rocket technology. And, what are we going to do about all that debris?
It's a tricky problem to solve. But some good news, it sounds like Pope Francis is doing better.
Oh, that's good to hear. He was in the hospital, right?
Yep. for respiratory infection and pneumonia. But the Vatican says his blood work's improving, especially the inflammation.
That's great news.
And he's even been joking around with visitors, so it seems like he's on the mend.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of ups and downs, former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's facing some serious accusations.
Oh, yeah.
Fill me in.
Well, the chief prosecutor in Brazil is formally accusing him of trying to overthrow the government.
Whoa.
This was after he lost the election to Lula da Silva back in 2022.
Wow. So what's the basis for these charges?
Well, it's all connected to that attack on government buildings in Brasilia.
Oh, right. The one back in January of 2023.
Yeah.
With all those Bolsonaro supporters?
Yep, that one. And the prosecutor's saying that Bolsonaro was the one who actually stirred up all that violence.
So it's like he was trying to undermine the whole democratic process.
That's exactly it. And get this, they're also saying he planned to poison Lula.
Seriously?
Yeah, pretty wild stuff. It's a really tense situation over there. And it's really dividing the country. The Supreme Court's going to decide if the case even goes to trial.
Okay, so this could have a huge impact on Brazil, no doubt. Well, in other news, a new scientific study just came out about, well, glaciers.
Oh, yeah, I saw some headlines about that. It's not good, right?
Nope, not good at all. They're saying that glaciers around the world are melting at a crazy fast rate.
I'm not surprised, but it's still scary to hear.
Right, and it all comes down to climate change.
Yeah.
They're saying it's the most comprehensive study on this ever. And since the year 2000, glaciers have already lost 5% of their ice.
5%. Wow. And I'm guessing the rate of melting is only going to speed up.
You guessed it.
Yeah.
It's pretty sobering. And it makes you think about, like, all those people who depend on glaciers for fresh water.
Totally. It's a big deal.
So what do we do?
Well, for starters, we got to tackle climate change.
Right, of course.
That means reducing greenhouse gases, shifting to renewable energy, being more energy efficient, and living more sustainably. It's all connected.
Okay, so those are the big picture things.
Mm-hmm.
But what about, like, actually saving the glaciers themselves? Is there anything we can do directly?
There are some pretty innovative ideas being tossed around, like making artificial glaciers or building underwater walls to block warm water from reaching them.
Underwater walls.
Yep. And there's even talk of using reflective materials to bounce sunlight away.
That sounds pretty sci-fi.
It does, right? But hey, we're in a climate crisis, gotta think outside the box. But even with all that, we still have to think about how to adapt.
Right, like for those communities that depend on glaciers.
Exactly. We need better water management systems, drought-resistant crops, and more diverse economies so people aren't so reliant on just glacial water.
Okay, so it's a multifaceted problem.
For sure.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this first segment. We'll be back in a bit to dive into some more stories.
Sounds good.
Stick with us. So, this victory against organized crime, tell me more.
Yeah, so Spanish and Portuguese authorities, they took down this big money laundering ring run by, get this, the Russian mafia. They arrested 14 people.
14 people, wow. So what was this scheme all about?
Well, they were using this method, it's called hawala. And basically, it lets you move money around, like, without any record of it. No paper trail, nothing digital.
So like totally under the radar.
Yep, pretty much. It makes it super hard to track, especially across borders.
So how'd they even catch him?
Well, it was a long investigation, but they found over €1 million in cash and cryptocurrency. It shows you how these organized crime groups, they're smart, they adapt.
For sure. But it also shows that when countries work together, they can take these guys down.
Absolutely.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit. Things seem to be getting tense in Germany about immigration.
Yeah, there have been some awful attacks lately, like that horrible one in Munich where a mother and child were killed.
Right, and it's bringing the whole issue of immigration to the forefront, especially with elections coming up.
Yeah, and some political parties are using these tragedies to push for stricter border control and faster deportations. The AfD party, they're really using it to push their anti-immigration platform.
It just shows how, when people are afraid, it's easy to manipulate them. And immigration is such a complex issue. It's important to remember that immigrants have contributed so much to Germany throughout its history.
Totally. It's about finding the right balance, managing immigration effectively, but also staying true to the values of tolerance and diversity.
Well said. And speaking of immigration, things aren't looking good in Panama. There are hundreds of people there who were deported from the U.S., and now they're stuck in this luxury hotel.
Right, I read about that. Panama agreed to be like a bridge country for these deportees, but now there are all these questions about, like, are they being treated okay, and what about their legal rights?
It's a mess. And a lot of them are from countries that won't take them back, so they're basically in limbo.
Exactly. And the reports coming out, it sounds like they're confined to their rooms, no access to lawyers, can't really communicate with anyone outside. It's pretty disturbing.
It's just a reminder that behind all the headlines and policies, there are real people whose lives are being affected.
Absolutely.
Okay, so switching gears to entertainment now. It's really sad. South Korean actress Kim Sae-ron has died.
Oh, I saw that. So young. It's just heartbreaking.
It is. And it really brings up the whole issue of the pressure and scrutiny that celebrities face, especially in South Korea. It's such a competitive industry.
Yeah, it's intense. And they're saying it was suicide. Apparently, she was getting a lot of cyberbullying and negative media attention after a DUI back in 2022.
Right, and it makes you think about Sully and Guhara, those K-pop stars who took their own lives back in 2019.
Exactly. It's like nothing's really changed.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call. We need to protect people from online harassment, and the media needs to be more responsible.
For sure. Words can really hurt.
They can. Okay, well, let's get back to geopolitics for a second. Remember we were talking about glaciers melting. So what can we actually do about it?
Well, like I said before, tackling climate change is key. We need to cut down on greenhouse gases, move to renewable energy, all that.
Right, but are there any, more direct solutions, specifically for the melting glaciers?
Well, scientists and engineers are working on some pretty crazy stuff, actually.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, there's this idea of creating artificial glaciers and building underwater walls to keep the warmer water away.
Underwater walls to protect glaciers.
Yep, wild, right. And get this, they're even considering using, reflective materials to bounce sunlight away from the glacier.
Okay, that's kind of cool.
Right. It's like we're in a sci-fi movie or something.
Yeah.
But it just shows how serious the situation is. But even with all that, we still have to figure out how to adapt.
Right, because people rely on that water.
Exactly. We need better systems for managing water, crops that can survive droughts, and economies that aren't so dependent on glacial water. It's got to be a multi-pronged approach.
Okay, so back to the U.S. now. It seems like things are heating up again with former President Bolsonaro.
Yeah, it's getting intense. So Brazil's chief prosecutor, he's officially charged Bolsonaro with trying to overthrow the government.
So what's the evidence for that?
Well, it all goes back to that attack on the government buildings in Brasilia.
The one with his supporters.
Yep, that's the one. The prosecutor is saying that Bolsonaro was basically inciting the violence, trying to stop the whole democratic process.
Wow. So what happens if he's found guilty?
Well, he could go to jail, he could be banned from holding office again, and his whole legacy would be tarnished. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal for Brazil, too.
For sure. Okay, well, shifting gears to a story that really highlights the importance of protecting vulnerable communities. Musin Hendricks, do you know him?
I don't think so.
He was an imam in South Africa, and he was openly gay. And really tragically, he was killed recently.
Oh, that's terrible.
It is. He was a real pioneer. He's considered to be the world's first openly gay imam.
Wow, the first? What kind of work was he doing?
Well, he was all about helping LGBTQ plus Muslims reconcile their faith and their sexuality. He was challenging the traditional interpretations of Islam and pushing for acceptance and inclusion.
That must have been really difficult, especially coming from within the Muslim community.
It was. He faced a lot of criticism, even threats, from more conservative groups, but he kept going. He created a safe space for LGBTQ plus Muslims, and he really paved the way for more understanding.
His legacy is going to be incredible. But it's just so sad that he had to die like this. It shows that even in a country like South Africa, which has laws protecting LGBTQ plus people, there's still so much violence and discrimination.
It's a reminder that we still have a lot of work to do. We need to fight homophobia and transphobia everywhere and make sure everyone's rights are protected.
Well said. Okay, so last story for this segment. Let's go back to Germany. We were talking about immigration earlier.
It's a hot topic right now. All those refugees coming in, it's created a lot of anxiety, especially about integration, security, and how German culture is going to change. It's really polarized the political landscape.
So what's being done about it?
Well, the government's working on integration programs, things like language classes, job training, and support services to help refugees get settled. And there are a lot of organizations working on promoting understanding between different cultures, bringing people together.
That's good. What about the security concerns people are raising?
Well, law enforcement is stepping up security measures, especially in areas where there have been problems. They're also working to prevent hate crimes and discrimination. But it's so important not to just lump all refugees together.
Right, like they're all the same.
Exactly. The vast majority of them, they're just trying to find safety, to build a better life. They have so much to offer, all these different skills and talents.
It's a really complicated situation, but we have to find a way to balance security with compassion.
Absolutely. We can't lose sight of human rights no matter what.
Well said. That brings us to the end of this segment.
We covered a lot, from global politics to social justice to the environment.
It's a lot to take in, but it's important to stay informed.
It is. The world is changing so fast. It's full of challenges, but also opportunities. We have to be aware of what's going on.
Absolutely. And don't just take things at face value. Do your research, form your own opinions.
That's right. Be curious, be critical, and be kind. Because in the end, we're all in this together. We'll be back in a bit for our final segment, where we'll dive even deeper into some of the biggest issues facing the world today.
Stay with us. All right, welcome back, everyone, for our final segment. And, I think it's worth circling back to what we were talking about earlier with Germany and all the tension around immigration.
Yeah, for sure. It's a really complicated issue, and it goes way back. But with all these refugees coming in, it's definitely put a strain on things. And it's made some people anxious about, what it means for Germany.
Right. Like, how are all these people going to fit in? What about security? Will German culture change?
Yeah.
It's a lot to process. So how's the government handling all this? And what about regular people? Are they doing anything?
Well, the government is doing a bunch of stuff to help integrate refugees, like language classes, job training, and giving them support as they figure things out. And then there are a lot of organizations that are working to help people understand each other better. Germans and refugees, they're organizing events, encouraging people to volunteer, trying to, bridge the gap.
Okay, so it sounds like people are really trying to make this work. But what about security? That's a big concern for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's definitely a top priority for the government. They're increasing security, especially in places where there have been problems. And they're also trying to stop hate crimes and discrimination so that everyone feels safe. But it's really important to remember that not all refugees are the same.
Right, it's dangerous to just lump everyone together.
Exactly. Most refugees, they just want a safe place to live and a chance at a better life. They have so much to offer, they bring different skills and ideas, and they can really make Germany a richer place in every sense of the word.
That's a good point. It's all about finding that balance, right? Between keeping people safe and being welcoming and open.
Totally. Germany's always been known for being tolerant and diverse, and it's important to hold on to those values.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up today's show. We've covered a lot, from politics and conflicts to environmental worries and social justice. It's been a whirlwind.
It has.
Okay.
And it just shows, the world constantly changing. There are always challenges, but there are also opportunities. And it's more important than ever to stay informed and involved.
Right. And don't just take our word for it. Go out there, do your own research, form your own opinions.
Exactly. Be curious, be critical, and most importantly, be kind. We're all in this together, right? Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for another news roundup.
See you then.